Victor, how difficult would it be for China to continue honoring this deal if the United States decides that it will not be honoring this deal? What does China do?
I think China will continue to do the right thing. That is, we need to fully acknowledge the fact that the treaty is there. The treaty obligations apply to all the countries, very important countries in the world, which have signed the deal. And we would continue to urge the United States to honor its part of the deal, because the collapse of this Iran nuclear deal will be much worse in consequence than whatever we need to do to continue to honor the obligations of this Iran nuclear treaty. Otherwise, I think there will be tremendous damage to the so-called U.S. leadership in the world. The United States is a mighty country. It's not a banana republic, and President Donald Trump should not become a frivolous president of a frivolous United States.
Peter, the German Foreign Minister, Sigmar Gabriel, he seems to be agreeing with the Iranian Foreign Minister, who said that a U.S. decision to pull out of the deal will drive European countries into a common position with Russia and China against the United States.
Which is exactly the case. So it would not be a unification of the West or unifying of the West, and the so-called leader of the free world or of the West, which the President of the United States should be historically, is actually damaging exactly this unity in the Western world.
Stephen, is the United States being isolated? Yeah, is it standing on its own as far as this agreement is concerned?
No, I think this is kind of a joke. You know, the only thing that matters is the international community going to be serious about constraining an active pursuit of nuclear weapons? We have, as an international community, if there is such a thing, consistently failed at doing that. And the North Korea example is the most telling and concerning example of that, with arms control agreement after arms control agreement actually failing to do that. And so we have serious questions that go beyond the personality assessments of the President of the United States. And he was someone who was elected by millions and millions of Americans. And there are lots of people who have concerns about, will this actually succeed in maintaining security in the region? There have been operations that have gone into Iraq, operations that have gone into Syria, not controlled by the Iran nuclear deal, but it affects the strategic perceptions of the role that Iran plays, and is it a trustworthy actor in implementing the kind of agreement that we have? And so I think there's still legitimate questions. It's not a matter of liking or disliking a leader, and if he's going to go forward and say, I can't certify, then it goes to Congress, and Congress decides whether there's any change that comes forward. But the partnership to try to implement the terms of the agreement doesn't change by President Trump saying, I can't certify this right now.
Peter?
If the talk comes to North Korea, I think that is the point. Victor said that earlier as well. I mean, it sends a signal. If you violate or if you disrespect this treaty, it sends a signal to North Korea: do not talk, build a bomb. And so then you are safe. But if you trust our word, you can be sure we will break it afterwards. And to do this in a situation where we are in right now is, for me, completely inconceivable. I remember in Berlin, if you, in the first decade of the 2000s, if you talk to anybody of the intelligence community in Germany, they would say their strongest, the hottest, and the most important and the most dangerous crisis is Iran developing a nuclear bomb. So, and now we have exactly the same discussion with North Korea, and thankfully we do not have this discussion in the moment with Iran. So obviously that is a deed, or this is an achievement which this treaty basically brought to us. And to rip it apart, I mean, okay, it's not being ripped apart, but nevertheless, to weaken it, I think would weaken the international security.
Go ahead.
I think it's important to recognize that right now, we don't have a crisis with the Iran nuclear deal. It is working. It is delivering. The IAEA has certified that Iran is living up to the deal. The U.S. intelligence service agrees with that. The Israeli intelligence services agree with that. General Mattis agrees with that. General Secretary Tillerson agrees with that. McMaster agrees with that. We don't have a crisis.
Right.
Tomorrow, we will have a crisis. But it's because Donald Trump has decided to transform what is a functioning agreement into a crisis. Nothing else.
You point out that the Israeli intelligence services agrees that this is an agreement that is working, but the Israeli Prime Minister doesn't. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Israel's policy regarding the nuclear deal with Iran is very simple. Change it or cancel it. Fix it or nix it. Nixing the deal means restoring massive pressure on Iran, including crippling sanctions, until Iran fully dismantles its nuclear weapons capability. Fixing the deal requires many things, among them inspecting military and any other site that is a suspect, and penalizing Iran for every violation. But above all, fixing the deal means getting rid of the sunset clause.
It's getting back to what you were talking about, Trita Parsi, inspecting military installations in Iran, which is allowed for in this deal, right?
It is.
Yeah. What about...
And on the most important aspect of the deal, which is the inspections regime and the additional protocol, it is actually going to be permanent. As long as the United States lives up to its end of the bargain, on year 8, the Iranians are obliged to ratify the additional protocol and make it part of the permanent law. So the most important aspect, it actually doesn't sunset.
What is the sunset clause?
Well, on some of the limitations that the Iranians have now agreed to, such as the number of centrifuges, etc., there's limitations that range from 10 to 15 years. And the reason for that is, and the reason why it's not permanent, is because the entire understanding was this. The Iranians did something that they were not allowed to do prior to 2003. As a result, they lost confidence of the international community. In order for them to be able to regain the trust of the international community, they have to go through a period in which they have to prove that they're trustable. That's why the IAEA is inspecting them. That is why the IAEA is constantly issuing reports saying whether they're living up to the deal or not. And after 15 years, if they've throughout this 15 years have had a perfect record and they've done what they're supposed to do, then essentially the path has been achieved in which they have regained the confidence of the international community based on the test that has been put forward. And at that point, they will be like any other member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They will not seek nuclear weapons. They're obliged not to seek nuclear weapons, but they are entitled to have a peaceful nuclear program that does include enrichment, such as Germany, Japan, Sweden, Belgium, and many other countries. But right now, Iran is not a Sweden. It is not a Belgium. It has to go through these 15 years. That's the promise of this deal, unless, of course, Donald Trump kills it before. And then we will never know what we could have had.
Stephen, what's wrong with that?
Well, there's nothing wrong with it if it works and if it's more comprehensive than it can possibly be. And really the issue, I mean, I really don't think it's very useful to be hyperbolic about killing a deal. If a president says, I can't certify something right now, it goes to Congress, something may or may not happen with Congress. Those are technical and procedural things. Yes, it has strategic communications or what have you, but it's much, much more significant if you have examples of risks of breakout. And, you know, I'm sorry, but I've lived through large chunks of decades of negotiations on North Korea's program, and there were august bodies that could certify nothing was happening until it happened. There were lots of people certifying that North Korea had no alternative to a plutonium path to a bomb until it had a uranium path to a bomb. And so this limited deal, if it were to go forward and achieve all of what its aspirations are, you still end up with an Iran that has a shortened timeline to breakout capability, if that was their inclination. And there's just going to be a lack of consensus around the world and within important decision-making corridors how much risk they're willing to take. And the fact that President Trump has a different calculus than others, that's going to change over time too.
Trita?
I think I fear our friend in Idaho may be living a little bit too much in the past here, because the inspections regime on North Korea and the one that Iran is now subjected to are simply incomparable. The North Korea agreement was no more than a couple of pages. The Iran deal is more than 150 pages. So it's gone into far greater detail.
That's not
But
true.
imagine if the Iranians were doing what Trump is doing right now, saying, well, this deal cannot continue to happen because the United States is still supporting Saudi Arabia and it's still supporting Israeli occupation of Palestinian land, and that they will then go back to their nuclear program unless the United States agrees to renegotiate. Rest assured, the American side correctly would say Iran is trying to kill the deal.
Victor, the chief American negotiator in those talks that brought this deal about, Wendy Sherman, she wrote a piece in the New York Times recently, and she said that whether the Trump administration's decertification unravels the deal quickly or slowly, unjustified American action will give the Iranians the moral high ground, allowing them to rightly say that it was the United States, not them, who killed the deal. Does she have a point there?
Yes, I know Ambassador Wendy Sherman. She's an elegant diplomat, and I generally agree and respect her views. Now, I would say for the Iran nuclear treaty to fall apart by whatever that President Donald Trump and the U.S. government may eventually do will be a disaster. Mainly because 2 points, very briefly. If we compare what the Iranian nuclear deal is with what's the situation involving DPRK nuclear program, we can argue the seriousness of the deterioration of the nuclear weapon program on the Korean Peninsula is exactly because there is a failure of reaching a deal with the DPRK, especially between the United States and DPRK on this very crucially important point. Whereas on the Iranian deal, it may not be a perfect deal for each of the parties involved, but through international cooperation at the very highest level, we have a deal, and the deal is working, and we need to do whatever we can to prevent it from falling apart. Therefore, I think President Donald Trump and the U.S. government really need to think twice, very hard about the consequences of a major change involving the Iran nuclear deal, because I would really not want to speculate as to what the consequence will be, but my instinct seems to indicate that the consequences will be much worse than whatever we can achieve through maintaining the situation as it is and to achieve the goal of Iran possessing new nuclear weapons.
Peter, very quickly, does this set a bad precedent? I mean, will it encourage other countries to say that, well, we don't have to respect deals that we've signed in the past? Could we have something like the Palestinian organizations say, well, we're not going to respect the Oslo Accords or anything like that?
Let's say it's an example, and certainly this is always a danger. I mean, it's a hypothetical question which is obviously hard to answer, but nevertheless, again, if the United States is not a country like any other. The United States is what one calls the leader of the free world, and the United States has a especially important role in this world. And if the United States starts not to honor treaties anymore, every other country could easily say, that is an example, we will follow that.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.